Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Planet Zoo. We are back in Arcadia and things are a little bit different. As you can already see, we have some animals in place and we've fleshed out a little bit of a basic area for our brand new habitat, which is still going to maintain the wetlands and tropical biomes that we have going in this area, but we're off to a different continent for this one. We're off to Australia and Oceania, and I'm really looking forward to this one because it's going to be animals that I've never put in place before, namely the koala, a platypus, emus, and the southern cassowary. And as you can see, we've got this lovely overhead viewing area there, and there's going to be a viewing area for the underwater section too, so plenty for guests to be able to see. But we're going to develop this as we go today, and we'll talk a little bit more when we dive into it. So let's do that right now. Okay, bear in mind that there's a lot of rock work today. As you can see by the actual outside view of the whole habitat, there's quite a substantial amount of work to be done in terms of moving hiding barriers and doing a lot of landscaping and stuff. The terraforming wasn't great on this one, so there's still a lot of work to do that we're going to be doing with the actual basic rock work here. So the first steps are to actually put in a framework here that's just about covering up the barrier and hiding everything that's kind of imperfect about it. So we'll be going over those areas where the terrain just curves and it develops into a sudden drop. We'll be adding more rock work around that to make it a little bit more of a smoother transition as we go down into the large pool here. There's going to be another waterfall as water's going to pour down over this side, and it's all going to kind of amalgamate in this one kind of little river that runs all the way through that underground tunnel area into the North American wetlands section. So we're just going through and tidying everything up, putting in some basic framework, like I've already mentioned, of stonework and things like that we're going to sink in a couple of wooden beams here to add a little bit of support to our glasswork area where guests are going to be able to come in and view the platypus in their diving animations as well. We'll frame this with a little bit more rock work, just hiding the glass on the lower side there, just to tidy it all up and make it look a little bit more refreshing, I guess. So that's not just this one flat surface. And I do this a lot. I've taken to it quite well. I'm quite enjoying playing around with the rock work now and stuff. It is tedious. It can get a little bit boring, but I think it's a very important part of building habitats within Planet Zoo. And I think those of you who've come to the streams and stuff and seen this have mainly seen rock work. So we're going to try and flash through this as quickly as possible, but most of this build was moving and shaping rocks and putting things into position. So it did get a little bit tedious at times. However, it's a very necessary evil when it comes to building in Planet Zoo. I think I spend more time doing this and foliage work than actually making buildings and backstage areas, so there's a lot to do here. We framed the guest walkway here with more rocks because I want it to kind of all come down into one large piece, and the original idea was to use a mix of these tropical rocks and faux rocks, and obviously I didn't end up getting round to doing that because I didn't think that the faux rocks were needed once I'd put all of this rock work in place and then maxed out the amount of foliage. Now we do have a little bit of a problem in that the emus and the platypus, I think it was, don't like a great deal of foliage coverage, so they are kind of losing out in this habitat, whereas the koalas and the southern cassowary can have up to 100% coverage in terms of their foliage. So there's a little bit of a bad thing about the build there, but I'd quite like to, once modding support is when we've kind of stopped having updates in Planet Zoo, I will probably download a mod that eliminates the foliage requirements within franchise mode, because I don't want my animals to be uncomfortable, but I also don't want to sacrifice a really good looking build for the sake of those animals, when I really like having lush habitats with loads of foliage in them. So it does seem a little bit, I think, to be honest, to be overly critical of the game design here, that having those foliage requirements is just a little bit stifling as a creative builder, because you really want to fill these natural landscapes and have loads of foliage in there and some of them you can like only get like a couple of trees in a habitat, and then suddenly you're over that limit. So not a great move really from the designers, but you know, it's something that we cope with. I like to cope with it by now just putting in the amount of foliage that I want to, rather than tending to the animals' needs. And you know, if the rest of the stuff makes them happy, then we don't need to worry about that. Anyway, you can see here that I didn't really like how much of a gap there was in the curved rockwork where the actual guest barriers are, and I ended up putting in another string of rocks there and then building this out with a little bit more of a thickness to give it some support, mainly because I didn't want to do something that was man-made in this habitat. Originally I had planned to do that, something that kind of resembled the seal habitat that we put in Northlands, which was like a lot of concrete man-made structures. The more natural stuff I put in here, the more I wanted to keep it that way without any interference from our kind of man-made structures. So we came around here and started doing our fence work, and it was really simple. I wanted to use as many of the Australia pack pieces as I possibly could, and then have a nice merge from the temple stuff into our new Australia thing. And as it happens, I didn't actually end up doing a lot of architectural work in here. There's a basic lean-to that's put on that I've not even decorated. It's kind of more of a staff traversal area where they can come in and move around. It originally was going to have some bedding in there, but as it happens, there's so much cave work and stuff in here that the animals have plenty of hard shelter as it is. And I've not actually put any bedding in, but we'll do that at some point and you'll see it in the tour. The other thing that we've not done is the guest education boards and things like that, because I've not kind of worked out where the guests mainly stand to be able to put those education posts in. At the moment, there's also no access to viewing the underwater section of this habitat. So that's going to come at a later date when we do a little bit of a refresher in this wetlands area and finish all of those tiny little details off. I think that's important, and it's going to come at like kind of a mid-season finale where we consider this whole area finished before we move into it. And we're nearly there. We've only got a few more habitats to build on this outside area, so we're not far off. Anyway, we put the fence in, and then I just made a few adjustments to the rocks, and everything's starting to look a little bit better now. Of course, we need to start working on that middle piece, which is just that one single rock, so we start building up. And one of the things that I've taken to using now is the random rotation, because it really helps build up these structures real quick. You can use some of the smaller rocks and just give them those slight adjustments, making sure that you're on the world axis like I'm doing here, and popping those into position. And you always get like a unique rotation on them, which looks really cool. Coming back to our guest area now, we're going to use some of these Australia path canopies because I think they have a really nice look to them, and they're not too dissimilar from the temple pieces and the kind of decorative pieces that we've put in on that area, that it looks like too much of a stark contrast, if that makes sense. I don't like things to have a really obvious change. I like them to have like a nice even flow into the next part of a zoo, so it all looks like it blends into one, and we can pepper in these bits of architecture. And as this is just a normal, like it's just a small little taste of Australia, we don't want to put too much in. So we want to have like a little bit of a difference, but not too much. We don't want to make it overpowering because we haven't fit all of the Australia pack animals in here, and we're not going to. We're going to have another section later on that merges in with our like grasslands area. That is another mini Australia themed area. There's not actually going to be a dedicated Australian themed part in this park. So it's biome focused, and then we have little touches that we give nods to a region where these animals might be from. Anyway, I had this tiny little gap, and I thought what I'd do is I'll just put in a little gate, and then later on when we're doing any like extra details, we could put a little bit of an observation post in here for staff or something so that they could go in. Another idea I had was to run maybe a little staircase all the way down into here. Obviously it's not going to be used, but I thought it would be a nice little touch anyway, to have like something symbolic that a staff member could come in here and gain access to the habitat. Moving on, we now have to do the underwater rockwork section. So we've actually, earlier on in the build, I painted all of the terrain grass again because having that like soft reset of that would help me later on when I came to put the foliage in. So you'll have to excuse some of the camera work here. It gets very difficult building rocks and stuff underneath a part of another habitat. So this was quite tough. There was a lot of moving around of the camera and trying to get things into position, but this is really where we start getting those details in as our rocks start to tumble down into the actual water area here. Obviously, we've taken the water out to make life a little bit easier, and then when we come to put it back in, it's just a case of adjusting the barriers, putting the water back in, and then bringing the barriers back down so that they are hidden once again. And this was a little bit of a difficult one to set up, which is why at the beginning of the episode you already saw the basic terraforming and stuff I'd done. I don't really like to put those in because they can be quite difficult and take quite a bit of time to get finished. So that's why they weren't in there, and you just saw a beginning and the basic structure. So we had our canvas ready to paint on, shall we say. Putting these rocks in gave me an idea of where I was going to use my terrain painting. Obviously, I don't want to put too much foliage in here, so we maybe need to think of some other set pieces, which we'll put in later on. And yeah, it's looking really good so far. Obviously, we were talking on stream about it, and the kind of main thing that stops people building habitats is not getting past the ugly phase of a build, where you've just got those basic structures in and you're waiting to put the next phase on there. And that's some of the things that makes it difficult when you're building really elaborate habitats like this one, that have multiple levels and little caves and nooks and stuff where animals are going to swim through, and you've really got to kind of have a vision of your bigger picture when you're building, I guess. And I always do have that. I never know how it's going to turn out because I don't plan anything in advance. I just throw something at it and see what sticks, and sometimes that is the good method to do. But when you're doing something like this and you're into your fourth hour of messing around with rocks, it can get quite boring and tedious and frustrating when something just isn't working how you want it to work. But perseverance is key when it comes to building these things, and you can really start to see the details coming together, especially using new little techniques and stuff. I've never really used the random rotation tools when it comes to making rock structures and things, but they are really, really helpful. And they're also good if you're wanting to do foliage, because you get that instant little rotation on a piece of foliage. So when you're looking to create little thickets and stuff and large patches of overgrown foliage, you've got that little rotation in there already. And I actually used this a little bit later on when I was doing the foliage section of this build. But we've spent about 12 minutes building with rocks now, and actually, if I'm being honest, it is more like 3 hours that's been condensed down and skipped through. But it's worth it. If you've got the time and the patience for it, I would totally advise doing this. Obviously, there are tools, like I've mentioned, to help you out, like the random rotations and things, but don't let yourself get burned out by it. Start off small. If you want to make little patches of rocks and just move them into position, that's always a good idea. Save them as blueprints, and then you've got them to go the next time you do it. And it's one of the reasons why I think using the faux rocks would be a good idea, because you can change the colours on those. So you could have a template of the faux rocks, and I'm sure you'll find them on Steam somewhere or on a Planet Zoo forum. There are colour profiles of all of the rocks in the game currently for matching your faux rocks to them. So all you would do is make your faux rock structure, save the blueprint, put it in place, then change the colours to match any of the other rocks that you want to put in, rather than doing what I'm doing and building with a load of different rocks, piling them up on top of each other and hoping something works. There are ways to trim down the time, is what I'm trying to say here. But I like doing it this way. I think it gives me a lot more control over the detail and the placement of things, and having that kind of basic structure then gives me an idea of what to attach where. Like here, with this tropical rock number 4, which is my favourite one really. I use this so much and then attach other things to it. I put this in to make a little bit of a staircase because I'd noticed a lot of the access points to the water were a little bit too big, so I've seen the cassowary leaping into the pool, and then I always wonder how they're going to get out, and I wanted to just make a nice easy place for them to access so they could get back out of the pool and onto dry land. And the other thing that we need to mention as well later on is something to do with staff access, because this area here where the staircase of rocks goes up, the staff initially did not have access to this, which made it difficult to put feeders and stuff in. Moving on now, we've filled up the pool again and we're coming in to do some foliage finally. I think this is probably hour 4 or 5 of the build where I finally start doing foliage work. And as the platypus's habitats are mainly around the mangrove forests, I thought I'd put in a little bit of a mangrove forest. Then over here, coconut palms and stuff for our koalas. Now, I have built a little bit of a treetop movement piece for the koalas so they can actually climb up a tree and swing across some rope over the heads of our guests, which I think would be a really cool touch. I haven't shown that in here because it was a little bit bitty, but you can see the stream where I actually built this, and you can watch me build that live. I'll link that down below so you can check that out if you so want to. And we're just going through checking out there the animals and what their foliage requirements were. Obviously, I threw that plan out of the window when I saw how little foliage some of the animals required. Like I said earlier on in the video, that's not something I'm worrying about at the moment. And in order to save this zoo, as it was starting to crash on me, I've had to drop down the difficulty to easy mode, so this is no longer a hard mode franchise. And I very much doubt I'll return to hard mode because I like my elaborate builds, I like my big zoos, and I can't make a profit if I have to reduce my guest count to like 1,000 on hard mode. It's virtually impossible. So we've done a little bit of foliage decorating there, putting in some tropical leaf litter. Our scaviola bushes make a return once again, but we have a little bit more access here where we can use some banana plants and some really cool looking trees to bulk this out and make it look a little bit less like our South American tropical stuff. One of them is this wonderful palm tree that I think came out with the tropical pack. So I've done a little bit of a decoration here, and then I'm going to fill in the in-between parts with scaviola bushes. Then we'll add in a few more bits of leaf litter to make this little bit of a rounded area where things have got a little bit overgrown, and then we'll paint around it with some mud. We'll then go back over it with a slightly less intense grass patch, and then that all fills it out nicely. So next up, we need to start decorating our rocks. Rather than just having them plain, I like to put a lot of root work on there as well, and have things really looking nice and smooth. And obviously these roots are going to dip down into our pool, as you can see here, and then come back out as we start to cover over this feeder here. So the roots come in here and just start poking out over the top, coming off the guest areas there, and then a couple of liana vine curtains going in there as well, and then scaviola on top of these rocks, pooling down into the actual landscape itself. And I just really like this. This is an effect that I use all the time, especially building with tropical stuff. Like I've said many times before, and I'm not going to bore everybody watching these videos with a mention of how amazing the scaviolas are. God knows what's going to happen when I go back to building with like European themed stuff. Anyway, I wanted to put some liana vines in here as well, just to really flesh it out, make it look overgrown, and I think it's looking really good now. This is where the detailing starts to come to life, and this is the little waterfall here. So we're going to put minimal foliage cover on here, but wanting to make sure that there's still some texture to it rather than just the rocks. I could have played around with some fallen trees and stuff here, but I decided not to. I really like the root work and little pops of colour against the tropical rocks without needing to do too much in terms of forestry and fallen trees and stuff. The scaviola is really cool because it's got that overgrown look to it, and I just really like how it sits in with waterfalls. Also means you can easily hide those special effects within the scaviola bush themselves. So it all adds to it, and I think it's just a really cool little feature. Next up, I'm not going to show you me actually building the waterfall because, again, that was a little bit time consuming, but we've brought in some tangled liana vines and stuff just to really give it that full-on texture. And then these little vines that, again, came out with the tropical pack, they go in too, just to add a little bit of overgrowth there and some leaf litter to finish it all off, with some nice tree ferns just going in there as well. And I think this looks really nice as an overgrown waterfall, and then of course we put in the special effects. Moving back round to this feeder, which we haven't yet covered up, I made a little bit of a profile with these spiny-headed mat rushes, and I just duplicated those all the way around. So there's a couple of dry ones in there and a couple of freshly growing ones, and I just think they give a really nice pop to the whole build, and you get that little mix in so that when we're painting with our terrain paint, we can actually put that muddy texture in there and then the spiny-headed mat rushes blend in really nice, and then they go backwards into a little bit more of a greener profile. And this was something that I duplicated and just used around generally, so we had this kind of grassy texture going all the way through it. Next, it was time to make our little lean-to. Now, we carry on the temple kind of structure here, but then we cleverly, in my opinion, put in some of these Australian wood panels, just to give you that little nod that we're about to change our theme here, and then we start building up our brand new lean-to, which is mainly for our keepers to kind of just access the habitat. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to decorating this, but I might do it at a later date. I wasn't sure what to put in here, and I think the habitat itself has enough detail in it to get away with just having this as like a little bit of a blank space. And I might end up putting in some bedding or something, but it's relatively small. You can see it here. It's only 8 meters out one way, and then I think it's 16 in the other direction. So we kind of just merged things around and tidied up the exterior there, and then started building our interior structure and giving it a bit of a framework. I had to move a tree, but it was pretty easy to do. And then we came around and started designing this interior, giving it some structure first, and then we put in some wooden panels and stuff just to make it look really cool, and added on some fence posts to make it look like a bit of a mesh structure was there. I feel like I rely a lot on the mesh pieces when there's actually other things that we can do, like put metal bars over a habitat and things, and it just gives it all a really nice, bit more of a lived-in feel, in my opinion. So playing around here, we had to move that structure support back across, and then we start putting in our panels here. Now, I wanted this to kind of match the effect that we had going in the temple rock work there, so it was just about getting it all looking flush and looking like it's supposed to be there. And then the top section of this would be the rusty Australian fences. And I think they look really nice, and I always want to use them, but because they've got such a strange length to them, it can be quite difficult to get them all matched up. There's certain pieces in this game that I think it can be quite difficult to add them into a build. I talked about this when we did the entrance rebuild in this very zoo, and it got quite difficult to match things up. And when you're kind of working with things and you've got a specific length that you want to get to, some pieces just aren't quite long enough to make it work. And it's a shame, because there's a lot of pieces here that I'd really like to use, but it's quite difficult to deploy them in the situations where you would like to actually use them. But yes, it's this Australian fence here that I really like the look of, and it was, again, they didn't have a great length to them for the windows here, so we kind of had to make a pattern with them that worked for each individual window without it looking too dissimilar all the way around. And we got it with that 8 meter long piece there, but then this shorter piece, it was quite difficult. Luckily, we managed to make it work, and then this was easy enough to duplicate and add into the other sides, given that we have 2 smaller sections here. And then, nice and easy, all done. Moving on, we have more rock work, because again, this side of the habitat hasn't been treated very well, and we need to bulk it out and just add a little bit more texture to it. Now, bear in mind that I haven't researched all of the unlockable habitat items for any of these animals, so there will be more stuff going in there based on our research and what we managed to unlock for these animals. We have the herb scent markers, the mirror mobiles, and a few other bits and pieces in there. You've already seen the feeder, the grazing feeder there. But other than that, there's not much else in here. So we need to be prepared that we're going to have to put in a couple of expansions to add in some of these little bits and pieces that will give our animals a nice bit of enrichment, which we don't have too much of at the moment. So I haven't actually used any mossy rocks yet, so it might well be that I have to go back before you see the finale and the nice little tour and put some more of these in, because just having them in this section is not a great idea and it doesn't make it look fully fleshed out. So yeah, that's something that I do need to bear in mind, is to make sure that I'm adding my layers correctly when I'm decorating. It's no good me saying treat it as a canvas and then only doing it on this side and nowhere else in the habitat. But you can see here, I think this is a really good example of how I make my rock-based stuff with both the stonework and the foliage in here. You can see us coming in with the larger pieces first and then adding in these smaller spiny headed mat rushes along with some more roots from the strangler figs. Now we don't actually have a strangler fig in here, but I still think these roots are great. And then underwater foliage time. So once again we've removed the water and we are putting in our underwater foliage, which again basically consists of the stuff we have above ground, because I didn't want to use a lot of the aquatic pieces in here because not a lot of our animals can actually have them in there, and a lot of them are more solely tropical animals or solely grasslands, and the only kind of Venn diagram where they all cross over is tropical oceanic stuff. So we've had to put some of these underwater. I only really use the scaviola and the spiny headed mat rushes because I think these things, they look great underwater as well. And you can see us in this little cave here, which doesn't have a great deal of decoration in. So like I said, we're going to put in some set pieces here. So some sunken tea crates and a couple of pallets, and then we'll add some more spiny headed mat rushes to it to make it look like it's been here a while and it's gotten a little bit overgrown and there's stuff poking through it. Then again with these basket ferns, which I think look cool, and a elephant ear plant or two, custard apple trees, and then I flipped some mangrove trees upside down so that we had those roots poking through, and it just looked like there was little bits of wood there flown in. Flown in? What am I talking about flown in? Anyway, I wanted to do another set piece around here, so we sunk in this East Asia wooden boat, and then we'll put a little bit of a spilled cargo in the bottom of the lake here. So little bits of wood and some fallen pallets, and it's just like these things have expired, for want of a better word. They're no longer being used, and we've thrown them in here as a little bit of a decorative piece for the underwater sections in here. So just some little pots and stuff that have fallen down, and then the backside of these rocks needed a little bit more foliage on there to finish it all off. And we're coming to the end of it actually, so I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. I know I've kind of rushed through things here, so I hope you've got enough, and I hope the tour is good. Thank you all again for watching. I really appreciate your time, and the streams have been going so well. I've really enjoyed streaming Planet Zoo and the cozy streams and the chaos streams. It's all been a lot of fun. I'm having such a good time creating content, and I'm so glad you guys are coming along and enjoying it too. So thank you for any time you devote to watching these videos, and I will see you all next time. Please enjoy the tour.